Hello and welcome to Books and Us. I'm Ranjit Monga. Listeners, you can read about the interviews we conduct on this podcast in my column Literary Speaking on the website www.globalbihari.com. You can also read them on my page at Substack.
Writing this book, putting together these unaired histories, has been my return. It is not encyclopedic, and it is not a history of victimhood, for I am not a victim. The provincial is not a victim. This is more like constructing an unimagined history. I write this in the hope that many more secret histories of provincials will follow.
In this episode, we are taking up a new or fresh perspective, which has been written about recently in the landmark book Provincials Postcards from the Peripheries. The book talks about the culture, ambition, desires, and unique attributes of the people from the provinces and small towns across the country, and in fact, across the world. The book sort of links people, communities, poets, writers, and artists from across the world who came from small towns and villages and made a name for themselves. The author of this unique book is Shumona Roy. So, welcome to the podcast, Shumona.
Thank you, Ranjit. I've kept you waiting for a long time, and I apologize for that. So, thank you for having me.
No, it's totally fine. And, it's wonderful to have you here. And just to give an introduction about Shomana, she's the author of two works of nonfiction, How I Became a Tree and Provincials. Plant Thinkers of 20th Century Bengal, a work of literary criticism, Missing, a novel, My Mother's Lover and Other Stories, and two collections of poems, Out of Syllabus and VIP, or Very Important Plant. Her poems, essays, and stories have been published in the Paris Review, Orion, LitHub, The Point, Granta, Guernica, Prairie Schooner, LARB, The Chronicle of Higher Education, The Minnesota Review, Emergence Magazine, The Common, The White Review, Burfroys, The Journal of South Asian Studies, American Book Review, among other places. She is now Associate Professor of English and Creative Writing at Ashoka University in India. So, Shumona, tell us more about this unique perspective. What is the book really about?
So, as the title tells you, it's called Provincials. And yes, so who is a provincial?
Mhm.
That is the question I set out to answer. And that's a question I set out to answer in the hope that others would see it as a question worth investigating as well.
Mhm.
Sometimes we ask and need to ask questions, knowing that the book or the essay or the talk or the classroom lecture might not bring an answer, but that it will perhaps only be able to set up a path of inquiry. A couple of decades ago, I was called a provincial.
Uh-huh.
I thought that I knew it to be a pejorative,
Mhm.
and I returned home to Shiliguri from a city,
Mhm.
Shiliguri from where I'm speaking to you at this moment.
Yes.
When I returned home to Shiliguri from a city and rushed to look at the dictionary.
Mhm.
Remember, I'm talking of a time before the smartphone and dictionary.com
Mhm.
became available on the
Mhm.
phone.
Mhm.
And I asked that question to myself, who is a provincial and what makes me a provincial?
Mhm.
So, to answer your question, that was the question that actually set it off.
Mhm.
And as is perhaps the gradient or habit of my mind,
Mhm.
I began looking at people, both alive and dead,
Mhm.
who had been or would have been, might have been categorized as provincials.
Mhm.
I began to study their behavior, the forces that had created them, nourished and nurtured them, as well as those that had caused them resistance.
Mhm.
I observed almost like a parent the choices that these people had made, the control that these provincials had relinquished or forced to relinquish, their intellectual and emotional habits and habitats. I think I was creating a family. I was
Mhm.
bringing all these seemingly unrelated people together. These people, strangers to each other, separated by history and geography and much else, but who shared perhaps just this, a commonality of origin. So that is how it became possible for Shakespeare and Rabindranath Tagore and D.H. Lawrence and Kishore Kumar to come together in the space of a book such as this one. Because you asked me, so what exactly is this book about? I'm not sure I would be able to give you a satisfactory answer because I'm very bad in blurbing not just the writing or the art or the artistic impulse of other people, but also my own writing. I can never say what this is about, and I want to just say that this came from a place of experience where I had spent unconsciously, I had spent, I think, a significant amount of time wondering whether I'd still be a provincial if I were the only person on this planet. And the next immediate thought was, are there provinces on other planets, on Mars and Venus and so on? And are there provincial planets? Is Pluto a provincial planet,
Aha.
for instance? So, is the Earth one such province? It has taken so many decades of my life to understand that my first unconscious understanding of the province and the provincial and provinciality was its distance from light.
Aha.
That is why I mentioned, this distance from the sun, Pluto. I was still uneducated in the politics of light, that even if it traveled in straight lines, its pathways are not straight, that it bends like knees do when in the presence of power. So you see, these words would come to me later, enlightenment and in the dark or spotlight and in the wings, and I would, from my own history, gradually come to recognize what a life in the penumbra meant. There were more of us there than those in the limelight. So I think provincials is a look, or is a study, an investigation, an inquiry, an affectionate inquiry into the lives of people who live in the penumbra.
So you have beautifully described a sort of a reference point of light as an indicator of provinciality, and another reference point which you actually start the book with is the opportunity to learn and speak the English language, which also is sort of a reference point for you. So, why did you think that the English language was important? To distinguish between a provincial and a non-provincial.
Uh, my paternal grandparents um, had to move from Bangladesh in 1947 when where their first two children were born, to India, which they always pronounced as if it were a thing that could be mentioned only in scare quotes. For them, the word India was an English word.
Mm,
Uh, they carried their bodies, their habits of eating and sleeping and speaking with them like everyone else did or does. They spoke in a language that the Calcutta categorizing machine characterizes as Bengal, overlooking the fact that there are multiple dialects that derive from regions, from Sylhet and Chittagong and Pabna and so on. Like many of my friends here, my father's family lived in two Banglas. The language at home, a language, and the Bangla of examinations and application letters and bureaucratic forms. It is undermining, of course, to be made to feel that the mother tongue, the mother's tongue, isn't adequate or polished enough for the world. So I noticed how little my uncles and aunts spoke when we had visitors from outside their family. my father's colleagues,
Mm,
for instance.
mm,
And I realized only much later that they didn't want to mispronounce or say anything
mm,
that would give away their class or
mm,
lower class background.
mm,
It might have been the first time I noticed how the provincial was actually a category of class, a class category.
mm,
The same thing you asked about English. So, the same thing would happen to my English pronunciation.
mm,
I often mispronounce English words. It is not only because of what linguists call RP or received pronunciation,
mm,
but also because I've only met those words in a book,
mm,
not heard them being used. It's
mm,
a joke, or at least you should be,
mm.
shouldn't it? That accents which bear the mark of the places we come from, they're almost our birth certificate in that sense.
Yes.
Uh, and pronunciation, which is a bearer of our history of moving in and into language,
Mm,
how that should be used to mock us, to determine our
mm,
socioeconomic class background.
mm,
That it is practiced by people like writers and academics who
mm,
say all the politically correct things in the classroom and in their books and tweets is a shame, really.
mm,
But even all this knowledge isn't enough to deal with the kind of nervousness I or people like myself feel.
mm,
Uh, even, I met you at this
mm,
panel, I think 2 or 3 days ago,
mm,
where I had to speak
mm,
about, botanical art or found art.
mm,
And I turned to one of my closest friends
mm,
to ask him how to pronounce PATIO.
mm,
And he always very kind of
mm,
wrote
mm,
PATTY, then O, so
mm,
patio.
mm,
I had used this word often in my writing because it's an interesting architectural space for me.
mm,
But I've never had to use it
mm,
in my in
mm,
spoken language
mm,
because no such architectural detail exists in the kind of world I was raised in. So I would encounter such a word, such a category, an architectural term, quite or detail, quite late in life. And even though my friend has taught me this now, I'm quite sure it will, the pronunciation will rust from from lack of use.
mm,
And so much of our uh, class categories and caste categories and caste and class identities have to do with our proximity or distance from the English language.
mm,
So, and I noticed quite early, I could only go to an English medium school because my father, then a clerk in a nationalized bank, the United Bank of India, he could not afford to send us to. So I spent the first 2 years of my school life studying in a Bangla medium school. My brother, who's 2 years younger, my father somehow managed to kind of convince himself that he would be able to put my brother through an English medium education. And one of my father's colleagues, actually, the bank manager at that time, whom I would later refer to as Maulai Jetu, Maulai Jetu would tell my father, don't do this. Don't put your daughter and your son in different schools, in different medium schools. And my father asked why, and he said, they would not be able to have a conversation with each other.
mm,
And my father was shocked because, my parents were very young parents. I was born when my father was 25 and my mother 22. And my father did not have the foresight to kind of imagine what Mola Jetu was telling him, that my brother and I would not be able to have a conversation because it was not only because of the languages that we would become proficient in had we gone or had we studied in English and Bangla medium schools respectively, but the fact that our cultural references would be different. And so my mother decided to apply for a job at this school where my brother had been, admitted. And somehow she was given this job, which meant at that time that my brother's education and mine would be free. So teachers,
Uh-huh.
children. So that is how my brother and my parents managed to put my brother and myself, the two of us, they managed to give us an English language education. But I grew up, so my brother and I grew up as objects of ridicule, always affectionate ridicule, the stuff of jokes. In this community, it's called Para in Bangla, a neighborhood, because it was a community of people who had come from Bangladesh as refugees, a community of school dropouts. They were our playmates on the on the field, in the playground, on the streets, and so now the English language is looked upon with awe, with some kind of respect. But for children, it was a thing to be poked fun at, like Amitav Bachchan does, in that song, the hemoglobin of the atmosphere, that song. So
Yeah.
our playmates would make fun of my brother and me. So we rarely use the English language in our conversations at home. But and this is what I begin the book with, as you point out, I noticed as I was growing into teenage, and that time when boys become interested in girls and girls and boys, boys began to write letters to me where the sound of the English language seemed to be employed uh, to make an argument for them. So Choton, about whom I write, a school dropout a few years older than me, sent me a single sentence, quote unquote, love letter. Don't worry, be happy, because that is the song that he had heard, but not in the original, in Amitabh Bachchan, or was it Sudesh Bhosle's voice. Uh, I found that interesting. I found that very moving as well. That to show one's love, to show one's emotions, now I realize I'm able to show my emotions with, you know, much more easily in Bangla, perhaps even in Hindi, than in the English language. But at that time, it must have seemed, this was the late 80s, early 90s, it must have seemed to my playmates, to my friends in the neighborhood, in the para, that English would have been enough for me to be interested in them. And later on, as I would enter the real world, a world outside the protection of family and school and college and university, and see this world from the outside, even a place like Delhi and before that Calcutta, uh, I would see how an efficiency or proficiency in the English language could guarantee so many entries, and how one's unease with it made people, perfectly educated people, characterize or mischaracterize you in a certain way. I have been stung from that kind of mischaracterization, and this was also a point of entry, a point of investigation for me to discover what what is the impulse that leads to the creation of almost an idiomatic expression such as Raju ban gaya gentleman. Yeah, so that the fact that Raju and ban gaya are in, so Raju is a name, ban gaya is in Hindi, and gentleman, but the gentleman is a seemingly English language word here, but is used here uh, with not with respect, not to show respect and awe, but almost to puncture the the sense of a person who's trying to outreach himself or herself. So these were the kind of social class categories that I was interested in, Ranjit.
Very interestingly, you have mentioned about when your awareness about this language starts from, for example, Archie's cards. You
Yeah,
mentioned Archie's cards, and
yes,
that was also very, eye-opening for even for me, because I remember the Archie's cards and the language they used, and you so rightly said that it opened up a whole new world. And like for example, Archie card would say that you are my everything. you know
yeah,
so
yeah,
suddenly, this was a new world which opened up, and I think we all felt like that, though I was in Delhi at that time.
right,
And I don't know how you would categorize me at that point, because Delhi, though being the capital, was also a very small place at that time. But
right,
what I'm trying to say is that maybe it was part of growing up, but we all were impacted by that. Of
yeah,
course, it's in retrospect.
yeah. I find this changing from generation to generation. So, for many, these Archie's cards, these Hallmark cards, unaffordable as they were, 10 rupees, 12 rupees, 15, the cards that we really liked could cost as much as 30 rupees. A really large sum for students who were quite obviously their target customers. So, you know, boyfriends would save, I think, months of their pocket money or money stolen. I use the word stolen affectionately, of course, as you can understand, from their parents and uncles and aunts, and from household expenses, uh, to save up to give one such card, this really prized object, to their girlfriends, and vice versa. And it actually wasn't a gift. So the kind of gifts that came with these Archie's cards were soft toys. But more than those teddy bears, white and pink and all these
Yeah.
pastel colors, um, what seemed to convince a generation of girls and boys, young adults, that their love meant something or that they were worth someone's love was the fact of this really, fancy piece of paper, hard paper, on which words had been put together that somehow seemed to convey all of what they were feeling inside, heart and hormones, onto that single document, as it were.
Yeah.
And that, I think, also became a kind of, like Amartya Sen says this about, the tuition system or the architecture of a secondary education system in India, particularly in places like Bengal, where, as he rightly notes, after a point of time, the school education system, by which I mean the government school education system, had kind of degenerated and had to be supplemented um, by education, private tuitions. I think these cards were also a part of that economy of education, that people who would not necessarily think and live or dream or love in the English language found themselves amidst a language which had functional and artistic and emotional use. I would notice gradually how these words would be displaced from generation to generation, um, over, say, the last 30, 35 years. Uh, Now, for instance, the words delete, the words missed call, like, share, subscribe, subscribers, uh, post. These two have entered, these are seemingly English language words, but they have entered all the Indian languages as I imagine they have other languages in the world. And I also notice with affection and curiosity that these words are often dislocated from, you know, the way they were meant to be used.
Uh-huh.
And in Sonipat, for instance, um, I find in my conversations with the security guard, for instance, when I was coming to Shiliguri, he used the word available
Mhm.
in a very decontextualized manner. And I somehow feel such decontextualization brings a kind of new energy uh, to these words. So, unlike many, for instance, and I see this on social media all the time, that there's a kind of mocking instinct. You would have noticed this too, Ranjit, that um, people, we see these so-called pice hotels uh, or street food vans and cutlet misspelt as catlet, CATLET. And we have this everywhere, all across India. And inevitably, it's an English language efficient population that derives its laugh from these, misspelled words. I like this energy. I know that something changes, not but and this does not happen only in the English language, but also in other languages. So when Shopna Didi, who helps us to cook our food here in Shiliguri, she told me in Bangla that a man had gone into Kamar. In Bangla, it's Komor. It took me days to understand that he had gone into coma. And I find that amazing. I find a lot of, you know, I find this to be the residency of the poetic. So I wanted to ask me about the English language, and I think I wanted to find the joy of the poetic as well in this, and not as an object of ridicule or mockery, but the energy that mispronunciation and mishearing brings to our lives like mine.
No, you have described the words that they get their, own energy when they are decontextualized
Right,
in the language they're used, and also that many writers, you have cited many writers who themselves found new energy whenever they visited a small town or they were writing about, provincial towns.
right,
Of course, Rabindranath Tagore, you refer to,
yeah.
even Shakespeare, D.H. Lawrence, the Bronte sisters. So I feel that you have sort of appropriated everything within the provincial. So what is unique? What is unique in their writing?
I feel that they, like, why do we take a holiday? Um, a change of place, a change of space. The reason we shift furniture around the house, um, you know, just change the location of sofas and the orientation, or, changing the flowers or the plants and things like that inside the house. The change of place or the change of space enables what we call a holiday. It's a break. We know it's a short break. We know it will end and we will have to return to life as we knew it before this moment. But it's a break that is necessary. And I've always wondered about people who do not feel the need to take breaks. By this, I do not mean taking a holiday to Europe or to Missouri or to Puri or Darjeeling. It's a holiday from one's mind, from one's the location of one's mind. Um, I see that many of these writers were energized in such a way that they discovered their aesthetic only when they moved to the provinces.
Mhm.
I'll come to Rabindranath in a bit. I'm Bengali, so I have to bring him up.
Yes,
That's the
yes, please.
accusation against Bengalis. Uh, and I'll have to plead myself guilty of that. But let me begin with another favorite writer, Vibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay,
Mhm.
um, on whose novel Pathir Pachali was based,
Mhm.
Satyajit Ray's first film.
Mhm.
So let me enter this through Ray. What did Ray? Ray was working in advertising when I think he discovered Pathir Pachali first in an abridged. I'm not very sure about the timeline. So, to your listeners and to you, I apologize if I'm getting this wrong. I think he discovered the abridged version, a version abridged for children. It was called Aam Ati Bhepu. So, the
Mhm.
sound made by the mango stone or the mango seed, whatever you choose to call it. And he had been asked to design the cover for, I think, Signet Press in Calcutta. And he was astonished by what he read. And of course, he designs a brilliant cover. He goes to, I think, the main text or Pathir Pachali, and he feels that this should be turned into a film. Remember, Ray was raised in Calcutta. He had been sent or packed off to Shantiniketan for a tiny bit by his mother, single mother, because Shukumar Ray, his father, had died at that time. But Ray had returned soon after. So, but this encounter first with this village life that he meets or discovers in the pages of Bibhuti novel, and then later, while scouting for a place for, as the word goes, for location, he discovers this place called Nischindipur,
Mhm.
uh, where he eventually films this. And that too brings something to the aesthetic. So for you would have of course watched this film, but also for your listeners, you notice how Ray is awestruck, and I would think that the rasa would be Adbhuta rasa, the rasa of
Mhm.
wonder. He's awestruck by how drops of water fall on leaves, off the tips of leaves as well. How kashful, or those grass, the grass, how it moves, and how he manages, or he feels, not manages is not the right word, how he feels compelled to focus on these things and not so much on the quote unquote plot line. Um, the camera is in love, falls in love, not is in love, but comes to fall in love with quote unquote this location. Vibhutibhushan himself, now I'm going backwards,
Mhm.
Vibhutibhushan himself had been changed by the provinces. He had studied, got an education in Calcutta, but having no capital, neither cultural nor economic, he had been forced to take up a job, I think as a manager or maybe a post below the manager, in the forests in Bihar at that time.
Mhm.
The responsibility given to him was that he would need to clear these forests to make them habitable for agriculture. He would keep a diary, I think from 1926 onwards, the 1920s, and this diary, extraordinary as it is, of his record of living in these forests, feeling not just in first, the Bangla word is birokti, irritation, annoyance, the fact that he had had to give up on the charms of city living. And remember, at that time, Calcutta is an extraordinary city, a
Mhm.
modernist city where so many influences and the excitement of those influences. It is undergoing some kind of transformation of art and culture, not only being the preserve of the upper class or the upper caste, but entering the bloodstream of, I would say, um, the majority of the population in the city. He feels deprived of that. And he's also irritated with the people he meets there because he should feel superior because he has a college degree, a university, a Calcutta University degree. But they know more than he does because they know he gets lost in the forest. These people don't. They know how to read the stars. They know the names of these plants. They know their medicinal properties. So this becomes a kind of education through experience of living there. And this becomes the material, and I'm using material in the way V.S. Naipaul says, uses material of what a writer is to write about. This becomes the material of this extraordinary novel, and I think one of the most extraordinary novels I have read in my life, Aranyak, based on forest living. Goes back, the title references the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, of course. And so you see, Vibhutibhushan himself was changed by living in the provinces. And it's and I began to notice this in many, many writers. Um, Let me now turn to Robindranath. What Robindranath made me, um, and I quote liberally from Rabindranath Tagore's Chinnapatra, written to his niece Indira during his stay on and by the river Padma, or Podda as we say in Bangla. And I would read what he would say about them later, that it was in these letters that he first got to practice his writing, the short story and the novella, also possibly the poem. And everything, Ranjit, would begin to fall into place. That literature, the word literature, actually derives from litera, meaning letter,
Uh-huh.
and that it applied to so many provincial writers, not just those who would use the postcard and the inland letter as their green room, but also those who would never publish a book or an essay or a poem, people like my parents, that a letter was accommodative in the best possible way. It allowed all forms of writing. And literature and literary history would have been born from these first telegrams sent out to the world, a form of writing where we became aware of who our reader was. So many of us at that time wrote letters. We practiced writing, as it were, without knowing that we were actually practicing literary writing or writing that derives from the etymological source of literature. So, the letter, the post office, the postmaster, these were very important tropes in Rabindranath Tagore's consciousness. But I find these to be very important tropes in the Hindi writer Bhubaneswar, for instance. And this I find true of most modern Indian literatures from that time, from the provinces. So in Dag Kaur, little Amol, this little boy Amol, waits to hear from the king he has written to. In the story about the postmaster, the girl who has come to love the postmaster, love the young postmaster, sorry, cannot even wait for a letter to come from him. It's because she's illiterate. And also, for all real life purposes, she's without parents, without an address. So, Rabindranath is aware of the spiritual energy of the letter and its effect on both the letter writer and, very importantly, the letter receiver. So, for many who were receiving letters, like my paternal grandfather, who would never buy a book after, moving to India, to what was Dinajpur and is Dokhin Dinajpur today, to this village called Hili, he would somehow manage to sell utensils and set up a shop and educate his children and also educate himself because he had been to school only till the fourth grade. Uh, he would never need to buy a book. And books, there were obviously no bookstores in Hilly, in that village. But he was the letter receiver from someone such as myself, his first grandchild. And Rabindranath, and this would be often be the only literature and literature in quotes that such people would read. And Rabindranath tries to import that energy to his writing, no matter which genre he's moving through. And letters usually bring joy, as we know. So he also wants to import that joy into the reading, or I would say literary experience.
Books and Us opens doors to knowledge and an understanding of the world around us. Let's discover together.
Like you talk about letter writing, and I also recall our time in school in the 70s and the 80s, that letter writing was a thing, you know. In
Yeah,
the vacations, we would write to each other.
yeah,
And as you also have written in the book that for you also, you became a letter writer, letters to the editor
yeah,
from Siliguri,
yeah.
so that was that it was a thing in those times, and sadly, it's not like that anymore.
You know, the form of the letter where you write the date, where you are writing from, who you're addressing this to, and then you sign your name. It has the form of Stan, Kal, Patra, the
Mhm.
place, time, character trinity that is at the heart of the understanding of the story in most Indian literary cultures.
Okay.
And you find that this is formalized in the letter, the
Uh-huh.
instinct, that instinct. So
Okay.
the date and place from where the letter is being written is a giveaway that the writer, when they migrate from the amateur space of the letter to the story, has to find a way to bring to life, turn it from information into muscle. And Rabindranath is aware of this migration from letter to literature. Yes.
And like you were talking about the provincials and then the energy which actually we all find over there. You were talking about vacations. When we take a vacation, we are supposed to come back recharged and we feel lighter and stress free. So I would like to ask you now is that who do you think is an actual provincial? Is your background, does your background make you a provincial, or there are many people whom I know, and now even more in the post-COVID area, there are a lot of people who are getting attracted to move, to distant suburbs, to the foothills, to the hills, and they want to live in small towns. So, in that scenario, who do you think is an actual provincial?
Right. This is a pattern that I have been noticing, and I've written about it also in an actually in an essay
Okay.
for the Telegraph. And so I have noticed this. You know, this what Ashish Nandi calls the journey to the city, which is also the title of a book that he wrote, that characterized the 20th century and
Yeah.
also the first years of the 21st century. I would say the first two decades, I would say, of the 20th century, uh, that people like my father had to move to the city for an education. There were no high schools or colleges and no employment opportunities available in the village. And it was imperative that to earn a living, if they did not have a family business, to move to the city. And gradually, this kind of journey to the city um, was it became the only kind of available formula for success. So you see, this whole idea, if you were in a small town
Mhm.
and a friend is introduced, a friend of a friend is introduced as वो दिल्ली में रहता है या मुंबई से आया है,
Ah.
such as you see it in the title, Mumbai se Aaya Mera Dost, the name of an Abhishek
Yeah.
Bachchan film.
Yeah.
So, such people were treated at one point of time. And even when I grew up in this small town, very small town then, called Shiliguri, and when I would go to my father's village, even people like us were looked upon with some kind of curiosity and perhaps even awe, that that we there was something, the city, and it wasn't a city at all, Shiliguri, it still isn't, the town, that urban living had some kind of sheen, a sheen of personality, even a kind of cosmetic energy to the personality of such a person, of an individual, sorry. And I have noticed this always with annoyance. Ah, yes, I witnessed lots of people moving from the city. The city in India, at least, and as I'm sure in most places in the world, is an unsustainable unit. The reason we have floods, the reason we have traffic jams, all of these are because the city is has become too large for it to be held together. And we are noticing a moment of decentralization. But please remember that such a moment is available, such a choice is available only to the wealthy, to the upper class, and to the middle class or the upper middle class. No, so because these are people who are able to buy what are called farmhouses in places like Chhatarpur and beyond, outside Punjab, outside, not outside Punjab, say outside the cities in Punjab and Rajasthan. People have holiday homes in places like, by holiday homes, they own holiday homes, or this becomes their kind of weekend getaways in Shantiniketan, in places away from the city. But let me stick to Sonipat, for instance, or places like Gurgaon, which, people are, the wealthy are able to enjoy that standard and quality of living only because of the migrant workers from places, of laborers, of workers who have been forced to migrate from villages, such as places in Bengal, to these places because there are no employment opportunities here. So there is, just as we imagined that the city would be some version of the American dream where one would be able to make and recreate and refashion one's life. And it was available, we thought, only to those, or particularly to those who had worked hard to get an education, like the way people made, a career and a life and a so imagined good life in Silicon Valley or in Bombay or in Calcutta. All these are, or Delhi, or all these are cities of, immigrants, people who have migrated from smaller towns and villages. The fact that so many are now able to work from home is only by virtue of their education. They are usually IT professionals, engineering degrees, or some people are work in marketing. This is not available to this category that India calls the migrant laborer. These people will have to migrate to the city because there are no employment opportunities available in smaller towns and villages. So I often find my parents and their generation, their colleagues, former colleagues, and friends, ruing the fact that a daily wage laborer who would clean their garden or, do some household work for them, uh, such people are not available in a place like Shiliguri anymore. And then they begin to see that it is because such people, such groups of people have migrated to bigger cities. I would like to believe that, I would like to, I wish I could, think of this as a watershed moment and say, ah, So this is the moment of the small town becoming
Hmm.
important. But no, the small town is being
Okay.
destroyed as we speak because we
Okay.
are being. You said you knew a place
Hmm.
like Shiliguri because you had spent such a lot of time in Sikkim.
Hmm.
So the Shiliguri that you would have seen when you were in Sikkim
Hmm.
working there is very different from the Shiliguri that I find
Hmm.
myself living in.
Hmm.
It is not a place I would have loved as much as I am forced to had I not been raised by it in the 80s and 90s, like I
But
was.
but I
Because
would
that
like to mention here that
it's okay.
once I was sort of forced to stay in Siliguri because the Tista River had overflowed and there was no way we could reach Gangtok. So in that big bazaar, that central bazaar,
Bidhan Market, yes.
yeah, we took a hotel and we stayed the night. And the next day, a driver took us through one part of Siliguri which I had never seen while passing through so many times, and it had very cute little neighborhoods,
Yeah,
with sort of still some houses which looked a little vintage, uh,
right. So
and
the
that
old house, sorry, please go ahead.
yeah. So that was very. It was very nice to drive through that part, and we see that in almost every small town or small city across the country, and especially for me, I can say if I visit such a place, I do feel a sense of closeness, something that draws me there. So, does that make me a provincial at heart?
I suppose there is a provincial, it's a very nice way of phrasing it.
Mhm.
There is a provincial inside everyone,
Mhm.
and it is independent of location. And
Mhm.
that's something that I wanted to
Yes.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it is the language, the vocabulary that
Mhm.
one use. So if you were to praise me, you would
Mhm.
never call me a provincial. And if I were
Mhm.
to praise you, I would say, oh, look at this cosmopolitan person.
Ah.
So, it was this binary that irritated me because I find that the word cosmopolitan or the category cosmopolitanism is is part of the DNA of being a provincial. I think of the cosmopolitan as an open minded and an open hearted creature. And I know from my own experience and of those around me that we were, at least at that time, and certainly now more so with the internet, which has kind of flattened many of these differences, uh, that we were welcoming of any and every experience. So this characterization of provincials as a kupomundu, the frog in the well,
Mhm.
was uh, was a stereotype that
Mhm.
hurt me,
Mhm.
that made me angry, maybe a passing anger. But if such a phrase exists, and we know there are frogs in the well, they
Mhm.
could well be applied to South Delhi and South Bombay and South Calcutta.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you would agree with me, having lived
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
Delhi for as long as you have, about those
Mhm.
neighborhoods, Ranjit.
Mhm.
I grew up in one such neighborhood where we
Mhm.
had, you know, this kind of what the influence of the Art Deco in Calcutta,
Mhm.
on architecture.
Mhm.
In Shiliguri, for instance, and this too I have written about in the book, the
Mhm.
architecture that emerged was lower middle class because
Mhm.
that is all they could afford. And it was a mix of the influence of this Calcutta middle class houses from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and the Assam style houses. So, because Shiliguri is situated between Calcutta and Guwahati, masons would travel to both these places on work. And so we did not have architects or interior designers. The masons themselves were artists who would add these peculiar architectural details and energize our living spaces. Sadly, most of these older neighborhoods have, been uh, robbed of this distinctive, you said cute, I would say sweet and calming architecture that real estate sharks and promoters have developed into quite ugly looking apartment complexes. And on this street, for example, this is my husband's place. And when I first began coming here in the 1990s, it used to be a quieter and a sweet place. Now there are only two houses that remain, ours and one house, one block away, Runuda's. Uh, Apart from that, everything, that you have apartment complexes and shopping complexes and so on, and you see
Hmm.
how noisy it is. It is
Yes.
difficult to even speak like I am with you right now because of the background sound. There's nothing calming here. So it is because the small towns are running on the steroids of capital. And capital is always in a hurry. Capital and development, these are destroying smaller towns if they are not destroyed already. Pankaj Mishra noticed this in Butter Chicken in Ludhiana, that he noticed this particular moment, traveling to India's small towns and noticing how satellite television was changing these places. And because I moved through Bengal's villages a lot, I'm addicted to Bengal's villages, I would say. They give me something that no other place in the world has
Yeah.
yet been able to give me. I feel that change coming over India's villages as well. And I say this with a lot of sadness.
Yeah, and I went to one of the malls in Siliguri, which is on the main road towards Sikkim, and to one of the malls, and being inside there, one didn't know where one was. It could be
Right.
Delhi, it could be Gurgaon, it could be
Yeah.
Noida, it
Yeah.
could be any place. So the that mall culture has sort of bridged the gap. But of course, as you said, the language, one would notice the language. What is the language being spoken there? And then
Also, what is the spiritual life, by which I don't mean religion at all, but the language of the self, that the language in which one speaks to oneself is now the language only of capital, the language of the imagination, a spiritual language which restores us or restored us like sleep restores us, every night.
no, that's what I meant to ask you. That that the affinity of a person towards provincial life is also because one has seen the big city life and the hollowness of it, and sort of one feels that going into a smaller place, being surrounded by nature, which you have also talked about in your book, that it's nature which sort of uh, brings out the special quality of a province. So
Yeah,
being there among nature, you can hear yourself well, and as you said, that the spiritual link with yourself
yeah.
becomes much better.
Uh, yeah, except that, you know, there is no quote unquote nature or
Yeah,
natural world available to us in Shiliguri anymore.
anymore. Yeah.
Yes, the Sark Highway, the construction of the Sark Highway has meant the mutilation of, the death of more than 10,000 trees that lined those places. And no one seems to be bothered because we are drugged by the steroids of development, as I never tire of saying. And I say this with a lot of sadness. Delhi, on the other hand, has a lot of plant life, interesting plant life. Plant life is accessible not only to the upper class, but to everyone. There is only one children's park in Shiliguri where you have a kind of tokenism played to the natural world. It's called Shurjashen Park. But uh, the only two remaining spaces available to the plant world in Shiliguri now are the University of North Bengal, where I
Okay.
studied, uh, because it would be illegal to fell trees over there.
Okay.
The other is a wealthy town, almost like a mini township, um, just outside Shiliguri,
Mm.
called Uttarayan, uh,
Okay.
available only to the wealthy, because
Mm.
you have trees that they inherited from buying a tea estate, the Chandmoni tea estate,
Mm.
and planting it with more trees. So you see this unequal distribution
Mm.
of plant life, the inaccessibility. So, children don't have playgrounds anymore like the kind I had when I was a child. There were
Oh.
playgrounds everywhere.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
it is not available to everyone anymore.
Yeah.
Only the children of the wealthy or wealthy
Mm.
children will be able to enjoy what it means to
Mm.
breathe cleaner air and these um, hyper hospitable places. Uh,
Mm.
this street I'm on, I'm speaking to you from, sorry.
Mm.
Uh, there's no way I go for a walk in the afternoon or
Mm.
early evening, and I've had to stop because I'm always scared of being run down by
Mm.
a speeding bike or traffic of that kind. So there is this migration that we were talking about, and this availability of the natural world.
Mm.
So these are also being bleached from our lives. We
Mm.
all know that walking amidst the trees
Mm.
restores us to ourselves,
Mm.
calms our nerves, and so on. This is not available to us. The reason we are becoming these hyper anxious people that we are, our relationships are affected, not just our relationships with the world, but our relationship with ourselves. And the home, by which I mean not only this architectural space, but also hometown, these are all necessary to our spiritual lives, but they have been taken away. Yes.
So now, do you think that you have created a category with provincials, and going forward, what do you expect of it, or how would you like to take it forward, or would you look for more, more feedback on this, or people also writing about it?
Race, class, caste, gender, the human and its other. So we have a strange category called the non human. So these categories, intellectual as much as they're emotional,
Mm.
uh, you would recognize that they have directed our political consciousness
Mm.
and the investigative energy of the humanities for decades now.
Mm.
So my question was, why not the provincial?
Uh-huh.
Why hadn't provincial experience been studied as an intellectual category in any
Mm.
culture?
Mm.
So, and I wanted to come to it not with a fault finding apparatus,
Mm.
not as a victim,
Mm.
but with joy and gratitude for the unique character of life that has been given to us
Mm.
provincials.
Mm.
So, in literary and academic discussions,
Mm.
terms such as provincial
Mm.
have been given a bad reputation,
Mm.
often conveying negative ideas like insularity, naivety, narrowness, stagnancy. And they're considered to be the opposite of an idea, as I was telling you,
Mm.
such as cosmopolitanism, that communicates positive ideas of openness, vitality, and inclusivity. I wanted to prove, at least to myself, first, that the cosmopolitan and the provincial are not antithetical categories. And
Mm.
that what I was provoked to dismantle. Because the first, as I said, is a praiseworthy attribute, the cosmopolitan, and the other a pejorative. Or certainly that's how it's been mainly used. One of the things that I try to show in the book is how cosmopolitanism has been a natural part of many a provincial's experience in the provinces. And because you've been in Sikkim, you'd recognize that so much of it owes to geography, such as the
Mm.
mountain passes in the eastern Himalayas,
Absolutely.
close to where I have lived, where you have worked. or the open seas in Goa and Kerala, for instance, that allowed visitors of all kinds to come and rest and perhaps later even occupy and take over these places. So I wanted to show that there is often a natural cosmopolitanism in the provinces that might not be visible to an outsider or to the academic. The academic's eye is often a tourist eye, so it is, since it is experiential in nature and not necessarily available as an archive. And I wanted to create this archive, and my archive is limited because it comes from the very limited perimeter of my being, of my mind, of my experience. But since the theorists of cosmopolitanism, books of cosmopolitanism, were at the other end, were inevitably based in metropolitan institutions, it became easy to stack provincialism at the other end of an imaginary tug of war. I believe that cosmopolitanism has emerged from the provinces naturally and not necessarily through a liberal arts education. And it is as natural as the cosmopolitanism of the forest, which can accommodate everything. Some of the most cosmopolitan people I have known are from the provinces. Many of them haven't been to school, they live outside literacy. But look at the shape of their minds and hearts, they are all open windows. And I also want to add that I do not see the provincial as a subaltern figure. I say this not only because of my weariness with the culture of victimhood that has taken over and even overwhelmed all our protests, but because I really believe that we are not victims. Yes, you've lived here, you know there is a culture of deprivation and neglect that is inherent to provincial life. But tell me, Ranjit, which kind of life has everything? It's a
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
utopia, isn't it, to imagine a life that has everything right and perfect in it, or at least everything we consider right and perfect. So these conditions, if we call them deprivation and neglect in shorthand, these conditions and circumstances bring an edge and angularity to provincial life that doesn't feel like a lack at all. I never felt this lack, or certainly doesn't when one is in the middle of living through this experience. And you asked me what the intention about writing this book, as with everything that I've written, beginning not just from how I became a tree, but also from the essays and poems that I was writing before my first book was published. The intention always is for my book to just be one installment, or maybe I'm kind of overestimating my impact, but to just be a kind of trigger for people to think, in this direction, that there are neighborhoods of thought that they have been ignoring for so long, and that it might enrich both their emotional and intellectual life. So I would like more provincials to write about themselves, about their lives, about their own angularities, and not also for so called metropolitans to kind of turn towards this ignored aspect in what they call critical theory, that it should bother them and worry them about their blind spot or spots, that their syllabi, their reading lists ignore so many of these writers because these writers do not or have not written, or these artists have not, their work cannot be fit into this template of post-colonial studies and so on. There are internal colonialisms at work, and the emerge not emergence, but the existence of a category such as the provincial or provincialism is only a manifestation of the fact that these internal colonialisms and post-colonialisms exist. I would be grateful for them if they turn their attention to this. Yes.
Yeah, you said that provincialism is, the cosmopolitanism is there in a provincial. I would like to also propose the other thing. I would say that there is a provincial in every cosmopolitan person. You know,
Absolutely so. Thank you for saying it.
so just in the end, to encapsulate provincial Provinciality. Would you be able to list out some beautiful aspects of provincial life, which, as we discussed earlier, that people are sort of discovering and returning to, but of course, you said it's not the same thing.
Uh, Let me kind of take you to some writers and maybe reading them. I think instead of just me
Yeah,
talking
yeah, yeah.
about this, yeah. So,
Yeah, that would be
so
wonderful.
say, yeah. So, say if you want to experience the joy of everydayness in the Indian provinces,
Mm.
uh, you could go to R.K. Narayan's Malgudi Days
Yes,
or Ruskin Bond stories set in the Doon Valley.
yes.
There are Mahasweta Devi stories of a deprived people in the neglected forest provinces.
Mm.
And they remind us of how caste violence is the axis around which almost everything is organized here in the provinces as well. So I'm
Mm.
not painting the provinces, as this holiday tourist spot. There's much more happening here.
Mm.
Um, I would recommend a writer, a Nepali writer, Indra Bahadur Rai's fiction about living in the Darjeeling Hills.
Mm.
They are now available in Manjushri Thapa and Praveen Adhikari's translation.
Mm.
Then there is writing from, because I'm very close to the Northeast, from India's northeastern provinces
Mm.
in English, and also body of work from the many languages of the region that is gradually becoming available in translation, and
Mm.
not just in the social realist genre, but in a range of genres. And you must
Yes, yes.
yeah, and you must look at the poems as well. So I am
Mm.
slightly partial, as you
Mm.
might have
Mm.
guessed,
Mm.
to writers from northern Bengal, particularly our poets writing in Bangla,
Mm.
Nepali, Kamtapuri. Their work available not in the Calcutta approved literature that
Mm.
Bengalis study as Bangla literature in
Mm.
school
Mm.
and university, but in little magazines that circulate among small groups.
Mm.
If you're really interested, and I never thought I would see this, but some of the most interesting things I read on Facebook
Mm.
when I manage to find the time to log in uh, are, are the most enlivening discussions about Bangla literature
Mm.
by writers from northern Bengal. I find it amazing that these people are having these conversations uh, about form, about literary practice, about creativity, the imagination,
Mm.
politics, aesthetics, and so on.
Mm.
Uh, Also, to look at how outsiders look at the province and provincials, a
Mm.
subject that I touched upon when I spoke about Ray, for instance.
Mm. Mm.
You could look at Upamanyu Chatterjee's English August,
Mm.
or you are Anantamurthy's long short story called Bara.
Yeah, I looked it up yesterday
Okay.
after seeing. I mean, I was just going through your book once again, and I looked it
Right.
up. Yes, it
Yeah, so
seems to have
there,
influenced a lot of people. Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
think it did. I think it was written in the 1970s, if I'm not
yeah,
wrong. Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a bibliography in Provincials, and it
Mm.
has a list of South Asian writers who have written from or about the provinces. I'm not asking you to read my book, but it's possible that you might find interesting writers to read over there.
Or if you can read this paragraph from your book, the last, almost the last one.
Okay, which one do you want me to read?
This one, the writing this book and putting together these unaired
Yeah,
history. Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Um, Writing this book, putting together these unaired histories, has been my return. It is not encyclopedic, and it is not a history of victimhood, for I am not a victim. The provincial is not a victim. This is more like constructing an unimagined history and a map different from the geographical. Imagine a map where the provinces are connected to each other, the opposite of the map we see in airline magazines where cities are connected by leaping lines. I'm trying to imagine such an emotional and intellectual map in this book. It is hard, and it will take more provincials joining in. I write this in the hope that many more secret histories of provincials will follow. Provincials and their experience have not been theorized because it is not a political category. It is also a fluid group, without the adhesive quality that marks a constituency, for provincials do not want to remain provincials. The privileges and discriminations caused by caste and class remain, no matter whether one is walking barefoot or on water. The markers of provincial life and provinciality seem easier to hide, a bit like wearing one's shoes or taking them off. It seems as easy as molting, casting off dead cells. Those who have moved away no longer feel the urge to theorize provinciality. Then, it is accessed occasionally as nostalgia. It is also more amorphous, more private, more phenomenological. That is why it has remained moody, becoming neither a professionalized category nor a political constituency. Do you want me to continue? Or is this enough, I think?
No, 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 this is enough.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
written, it's put down your thoughts really beautifully.
Thank you, Ranji.
So, thanks a lot for joining us. It has been quite a pleasure to record this, record this podcast with you.
Thank you, Ranjit. I enjoyed speaking to you. I'm very sorry that I haven't been as prompt with my correspondence as I should have. And
No,
yeah,
no, no, that's perfectly fine. Being in the media, we just take it in a stride. Yeah,
thank you and stay well.
yeah. And do you want to give any contact details?
I have a website,
Yes, yes, yes.
shumanaroy, I think.com. Yeah, and you could write to me at shumana001 at gmail.com. SUMANA001 at gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well. But yeah, if you just want to have a conversation about something, email is a better place to be in. To write to me, write to me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I will remember you next time if I ever move, pass through Siliguri.
And thank you. And if I'm here, do come home.
Yes, yes, sure. I will.
Okay. Bye, Ranji.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
So that was Shumona Roy reflecting on her book Provincials Postcards from the Peripheries. We hope you found this conversation enriching, a layered exploration of life in smaller towns and the creative minds which were shaped and inspired by such landscapes. Shimona invites us to turn our gaze towards these geographies, but not as margins. And perhaps it is time to look at them as spaces of thought, feeling, and transformation. So that's all for today. If you would like to share about a book or know authors you would like to put me in touch with, you can reach me at podcast@raymondproductions.org. That is RAMONPRODUCTIONS.org. Thank you for listening to this episode of Books and Us. This is Ranjit Monga signing off. Till next time, goodbye and take care.